Hello and welcome to another edition of Stager Insights. Today, I am truly excited to bring to you Amy Fedele from Pretty Purple Door. So tell me first, Amy, why is it called Pretty Purple Door?
Oh, that's the question of the day, isn't it? Everybody
Yes.
always asks me that. I'm big on color theory, so I'm sure some of your audience would appreciate that. And purple is the color of creativity and open-mindedness. So that's really the reason. My favorite color is actually green,
Oh,
but
that's
I chose
interesting.
purple just to feel like welcoming and open-minded. And yeah, using
Well,
that.
it was definitely the name of your company sort of attracted me at first. So I'll tell our listeners today why we are here. So Amy has a really unique product and training that I think all stagers and decorators and homeowners alike should invest into and learn from. And so we're going to be talking about some of those things. Her expertise is in garden design and maintenance, and she has been a guest on blogcasts, podcasts. She's written ebooks and being featured in Country Magazine, as well as having an amazing website. So we're really thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thanks
So
for having
let's
me.
get started. Tell us how you first started with this idea of teaching people how to design their own gardens.
Yeah, so I bought my own home in 2012, and I didn't really care too much about landscaping at all. It was sort of one of those, not really a fixer-upper, but there was a lot going on, and landscaping was just one of the things that I felt like I had to check off of my to-do list. But after getting some help from my wonderful sister-in-law, things really changed for me. I started to make these weird connections. I have a background in graphic design. I should probably mention that. So I was a website designer for many years and was always helping other people with their design challenges digitally. So when I started to go outside and I would see this plant is blooming now, and when I turn and I look at it this way, it's playing off the color of something over here. It started to kind of make all these connections between my design background and how the landscaping was working. So I got really interested in garden design specifically, and just being able to actually interact with your landscape instead of it being on a flat page was really exciting. And it was just like a new way to learn about design. So that's sort of what I started teaching as I was coming up with these different design principles that I learned back in college and working with all these clients, and then trying to turn them over into landscaping and just talk about landscaping and gardening in a new way. Lots of people took interest in it. So that's sort of how it started.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, our sort of primary focus is helping people who are wanting to start staging businesses so that
Hmm.
they can help people get their houses sold for the most money in the shortest amount of time. And I've
Right.
always maintained that curb appeal and sort of lifestyle living, which incorporates, backyard gardening, is a part of that, but never really pursued it very much. And I'm sort of like you. I got into gardening through a back door, in a sense. You have a garden because you bought a house, and it just looked like a lot of work. And then all of a sudden
Yes.
things start to grow, and then you realize how you're nurturing your inner soul. And right
Yes.
now, one of the biggest explosive growth areas for real estate is actually wellness real estate. And as a result of COVID, of course, more and more people got interested in even container gardening. So I think,
Hmm.
container gardening, balcony gardening, which is where I started my business on, is also expanded out into small or large gardens. And for me, I post occasionally photos of, things that are blooming, or a special vignette that I've got in my garden. And people are like, how did you ever do that? And I'm like, well, it's been a journey. And I know I've lost a lot of money through buying the wrong thing, won't grow in that area.
Yes.
So, maybe talk a little bit about the course that you have
Hmm.
and what somebody would learn from it.
Well, there's definitely basics to gardening, just the very basic things like the amount of light that the area is getting, the type of soil that you have, your general location within the world that you're in. So those are things that you should kind of learn about before getting into a course like mine. So it's not like really, I say that beginners can learn a lot from it. And I do provide resources for those very, very basic things. But my course is really learning about how plants work together and how they can enhance the area around them, how you would combine, like you were saying, the combinations, or how do you make this look good with this. So my course really goes over all of those considerations, like the design considerations for creating a flower garden bed. And it's really, really focused on keeping it blooming and looking great all year long. So not just very seasonal, where a lot of perennial plants and things like that will only bloom for 2 to 4 weeks out of the year. So if you're only choosing like one variety of plant, it's not going to continue throughout the year. So I teach a process for making sure that the garden looks great, but also continues to provide interest the entire year, including the winter. So that's what the course does.
Okay, so help me with this perspective, which I find very interesting. I have students from, millennials through to seniors. I'm not even going to say baby boomers, but all the way through. And I found that the younger someone is, the less enamored they are with gardening. And when I see somebody's curb appeal, and I say to the group, okay, tell me what you would recommend. It's like, pull that tree out, trim that stuff back, get rid of that stuff that's growing up the porch. And I'm like, oh my God, that's wisteria. That's been growing for 15 years.
Yeah, my heart, right?
Is there a way that someone would be able to transfer some of the knowledge that they would get from your class to be able to identify what can stay and what should go, and, how to enhance that curb appeal?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, design is a lot about creating focal points and creating interest outside. And it's not only when you're outside, while that is part of it, experiencing the outside, but also from the indoors. So if you're looking out of windows in your house and having framed views and things like that, can get really interesting for the younger generation. The younger generation is also really, really seems more health conscious and more nature conscious. So providing pollinator plants or friendly plants to the ecosystem is really important too. So my course goes over a lot about what would be an invasive plant that you wouldn't really want to keep in your landscape, and then like an alternative that you could use a native plant to provide habitat for wildlife, and how to continue that throughout the season. So
great. That is one of the things that I've been able to secure is I have a sign in my yard that says it's a certified wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
And through working through that organization to be able to put the pollinators in the water and things like that. And I know like it's there for people to stop and read, and to get interested in that. But like you said, it's so much about the ecology. And part of the development of our staging programs back in 2007, I think it was, I coined the phrase eco-staging. Okay. And the concept of that was the more marketable you can make a house, the easier it is to sell it. And I really did think it was going to be the next big thing since sliced bread. But it's taken, 15 years to go forward for everybody to start now paying attention. And the simple things that I used to tell the people, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, please, but was if you have a north facing house, you're going to get the north winds in the winter, and you could plant cedars as a protection for that cold. Right? If you have, if you identify what is the sunniest part of the lot, and on that side, if you had three deciduous trees, so that the leaves are not there in the wintertime and the sun can still warm that space, but you could reduce air conditioning costs by 40%. So I've been working on that principle, and trees, of course, clean the air, and how it's 22 trees to clean the air for one person. And I live in an older neighborhood, and I see young people coming in and they're chopping down like 60-year-old growth. I could just cry. Yeah. So, can you speak to that sort of concept?
Yeah. So I'm not sure, where are you located actually? Because the wind differs here, and I'm in the Eastern United States, so it's like east to west or west to east, depending on where you live here, where you would get the wind
Well,
vary.
I personally am in Southern Ontario,
Okay,
a place called
so
Niagara. It connects to the United States at Buffalo, right?
okay,
So Fort Erie,
that's not
Buffalo.
too
That's
far from me,
no,
actually.
it's not. That's
Just near
right.
Buffalo a few weeks ago, and it's about 5-hour drive from here.
Uh,
But
well,
yeah, so your
from Buffalo to where
property,
we are, it's sort of about 45 minutes, and
oh,
it's
you're
a garden
close.
belt, so it's a finger of land that goes between two lakes. So I think we're zone 5 is what I sort of work on, but
Yeah, and the wind might be different in that particular area because of the winds from the lake and
mhm.
all of that. So there are prevailing winds where it would just be east to west is like typical, or west to east. But you could also have like your own particular microclimate, like where you live, where the winds would blow in a different direction. But it's fairly easy. I mean, if you're living at the property for any amount of time, you would start to see like where the winds are typically coming from if there's a storm. And once you know that information, it's really useful to be able to block that wind. I try to teach people about that, and the sun, like you were saying, the deciduous tree is like a wonderful idea because it will shade your property during the warmer months, and it could reduce the heating costs. But then in the winter, the leaves will all drop. That's what deciduous means. So in the winter, you will get more light into the house and things like that. So yeah, that's really interesting how the weather plays such a big part. And I think it's so different from staging the inside of a house where you have full control. Like you have to work with Mother Nature in a lot of ways with gardening, where the winds could be blowing here, or if I want a seating area in a certain area of the yard, am I going to be eating in that seating area for breakfast or for dinner? Because the shade will depend on the time of day that you would want to use the space and things like that. So it gets really interesting. Yeah.
I like that you mentioned the view, the sort of figuring on the view from the inside of the house and locking onto that, because I find I do that all the time as I wander through my house. I'm looking through, a bedroom window and thinking, oh, that needs to be fixed, or that needs to be fixed. I'm aware of it, and I wondered if that was sort of an ingrained staging technique, that we've developed just because we have that eye and understand what the focal point is.
Yeah.
So we have students from all across the United States, from the West Coast to the East Coast, as well as for Canada. And obviously, wherever you are, the hotter it is, the less ability you have to create this flourishing garden that, you and I can. So what if somebody's in the desert, or, in Southern California? Is there something that they will learn from it? Do you talk about xeriscaping, for instance, or?
I don't talk about xeriscaping specifically, but I do have students all over the world, like everywhere from Canada to Australia to Texas. I have a lot in Southern California that are really interesting in creating just that natural feel outside. So no matter where you are, everyone has these challenges where you want to grow something and it's not particularly good at growing where you live, and that can be really frustrating. But once you start to learn about the area that you live in, there are absolutely 100%, there are plants that will grow in Southern California or in a desert-like climate. I mean, unless you literally walk outside and you're not seeing any plants at all, like anywhere, like plants grow no matter what the environment. And there are plants that are particularly native to the area in which you live. So that's a great place to start if you're in a challenging gardening environment, is to start looking up native plants to Arizona or native plants to Southern California, and you'll start to get these lists and develop lists of what plants would actually do well in that environment. And when it's native, it just means that it grows in the wild there. So without any human intervention whatsoever, that plant will grow in on the side of the road or in an open field or things like that. So once you start to learn that and you realize that there's a lot of different plants that can grow no matter where you live, it opens up a whole new world. So a lot of my my course does cover plant research and understanding how to find these plants and where they live on the internet, and then how to combine them together. So I have tons of resources within my course that would show you exactly how to find those plants and how you can use them in your own landscape.
Now, speaking of internet, you've just created another question in my mind.
Sure.
I often see, on your Facebook wall, because I might have looked at something, of course, it starts coming as commercial on your Facebook, but it's really about, can you buy stuff from nurseries online safely? I know we see let's call Brex bulbs, for instance, a well-known space.
Mhm.
And then you look at all the pictures and they look amazing. And then when you get to checking out, it says, this comes as a 4-inch tuber and don't panic, like what? It's like, what does that mean? So can people safely buy online, or do they always
Yeah.
have to go to a nursery?
No, you can. So if you're kind of new to it and you're just kind of looking for ideas, I would recommend looking locally first just to see what's available. It's a lot less intimidating because all of the plants that a local nursery will be selling are ones that actually will grow in your area. So it's more region specific plants. But once you go online, you have to start understanding that, okay, this thing that I saw on Facebook might not grow where I live. So you have to do that little bit more research. But on my website, I can actually give you the link. I have an entire article with all the online nurseries that I've personally tried and you can trust, and just sort of understanding what the differences are between shopping online for plants versus shopping at a nursery. I have another article about that and what you can expect from that. But there are a lot of really great online nurseries, especially since COVID. I feel like a lot more have come because during that time it wasn't safe to be going out and shopping. So I think a lot of nurseries kind of popped up online. So you can actually get so many plants online now. It's really exciting, but also it can be really overwhelming to start looking online.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Really good thought. And I never thought about it from the COVID perspective, but that makes a lot of sense. I know for me, from a convenience perspective, I've been tempted to pick up plants at the garden center at the grocery store versus going to a dedicated nursery that might take me, 10 more minutes to drive to. But what I found when I do go to that nursery, aside from the fact for me, it's a holistic hour. Once you're wandering through all those plants, it's like, oh my God, I love this, I want that. And so from that perspective, I found it's definitely a healing, let's call it therapy. And then, but what I found is if you ask those people questions, they actually know the answers, and can give you a lot of guidance in that.
You can get a lot more personal attention than you would outside of the grocery store, for sure. What I love about going to like a local nursery versus just stopping outside of the grocery store and grabbing things, not that there's anything wrong with that, but what I really like is putting a lot of different plants in my shopping cart and then kind of setting them out together and doing that design part of it while I'm actually still in the garden center. I'm like, okay, all of these plants that are blooming, right, they're all blooming in the garden center. So you know that they bloom at the same time of the year. And if you set them out on a table or you arrange them in your cart, you can start to get an idea of how they would look when they're planted together in your landscape. And that can be really powerful, especially if you're having trouble getting plants that are blooming together at the same time and trying to understand what will this actually look like in the landscape. You can do that if you have a wider variety of plants to choose from. So that's what I love doing.
Oh,
I'm like the weird person in the corner,
no,
like
it's a great
arranging the plants.
It'll take 2 hours to go to the nursery now, you fiddling
Yeah,
around.
that's okay. It can take all day if you ask me.
That is a really good tip.
No
So
problem.
maybe you could talk. I want 2 things I want to bring up before I forget. One is if you could talk about what would somebody learn on that free workshop that you have on your site? And we're going to be able to link to that for all of our listeners. You'll be able to link to that. But then the other thing was some of the disasters that you've been involved with from either your clients who've, taken the training, or they've come to you because they've, endured a disaster.
Yeah. Okay. So the training, it's called 3 Gardening Secrets, and it's really just the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing people make, either at the nursery when I'm there, or just in general, what I see when students come in or when I work with clients, the mistakes that they're making. So it's like the top 3, and I go over why that is a mistake, because some of them aren't very obvious, and then what the solution to that mistake is. And I also provide like a PDF that you like a document that you can like read through and get the details of, if you don't have all the time to watch that training. So yeah, so that's really helpful. I think it's like the things that I wish I knew when I was starting, back when I bought my house and I was making all of these mistakes. So I love that training. I think it's a really good introduction to what it is that I do. And then as far as other mistakes that I see people come in, or one that I made that was a big one, was not looking up when I planted trees. I don't know why in the beginning, it just didn't make, it didn't, it was a small tree, so I didn't think to look up at the power line that was like running right over where I was planting. So that's a big one. And like placement of the trees in the beginning, think about the views from inside, and maybe you can frame the view of the tree from inside of, my favorite is kind of like your kitchen window is a great one, because you're going to be spending a lot of time at the sink, washing dishes, cleaning things. What would you be looking at that could provide a lot of really beautiful view for you while you're having to do normal housework? I think that's really important. The placement of the trees is a big one though, and where you put them on your property. Another thing I see people struggle with is not dealing with any kind of water issues or pooling of water, and not taking care of that before they start to plant. So there are actually plants that will survive in boggy conditions where there's standing water. So you could either create some kind of, it's called a rain garden. You can build a rain garden to help with that irrigation or the drainage issues that you're having, or there's other solutions like French drains and grading the yard so it slopes away from the home. That's super important. So I think in general, it's just like the preparation of the space and making sure that you're making a plan and coming up with a plan of action before you just start sticking things into the ground. And also just looking up things for what the plant will do as it gets, as it matures. Is it a very aggressive spreading plant, or how big does it get? Like when you get it from the nursery and it's a little 6-inch plant, it might get 6 feet by 8 feet high and wide. And just making sure you're paying attention to that and making sure you're not planting anything that's invasive. So there are websites online that would tell you, but usually if I'm in the garden center, I'll just grab my phone and say like, is lavender invasive? And just Google that and make sure that you're not planting something that is actually aggressive and because that can destroy like local habitat and ecosystems around you. You don't want to plant anything that's going to like damage property or spread aggressively and really cause issues. So just doing that quick search before you buy anything is really helpful. And the amount of work that it'll take to actually eradicate that later as it spreads and grows is just a real problem for a lot of people. So
I'm living that nightmare now because I have trumpet vine.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I've seen it as you drive around the city. Somebody's trained it to come up a lamppost or something, and it looks fantastic. Oh my God, I'm going to do that. And I brought this trumpet vine with me from my other house. I dug it up because I didn't want to leave it. I cut it back, you know, carried it, nurtured it, put it in one spot that I thought it would go, and didn't realize how much shade was going to be there. So then it had to be dug up and put somewhere else. And it's now been in this spot for probably about 8 or 10 years. And now it's like,
it's starting to
10 million
have a mind of its
every
own.
time you turn around, there's another one, you know. I mean, most of it I can get with a lawnmower, but it's starting to pop up in the neighbor's yard, and I'm like, they're not gardeners yet. So I can zoom in over with, take that one out, but you know, it is
yeah. And that's the thing about invasives is a lot of times they'll spread to neighbor properties, and a lot of times you won't even see the spread of invasives, especially if it's like a bush with berries on it. Like the birds will start to eat the berries and then drop the berries all over the neighborhood or into wooded areas or places where there's no human intervention. So when a plant gets into a wooded area that's not taken care of by any people, it can really spread rapidly, and it causes a lot of problems for all of the local wildlife and all the things that we want to preserve. So I'm very big on like, taking care of the environment and all of that. I think that's part of the nurturing and the wonderful part about gardening. So just be a little careful when you just Google it before you buy it, and make sure that you're not getting anything that's going to get out of hand or cause you like a ton of extra maintenance, because who wants that? Especially if you're selling the home, you don't want to leave the next homeowner with a huge problem on their hands either,
Yes. And that's what I was just thinking. It's like, again, if we go to curb appeal for someone who's helping somebody get their house ready for sale, I'm thinking about my neighbor next door. I'm almost thinking of digging a channel, a trench to separate it, because they don't maintain their garden, and it's full of what do you call it? I call it creeping Charlie. It's like an invasive weed that's just, and now it's populating my own garden. Is there a part of your program that would deals with weeds and how somebody would recognize them?
Yeah, I definitely teach about that, and I have resources on weed control and even prepping a garden bed space, because a lot of times when you do dig or till a new garden area, that's when you start to introduce weeds because they're underground and they're dormant. So as you till, you're pulling up all of these weed seeds. So I teach like a no dig method where you wouldn't actually have to dig in the ground. So it's way easier. It's less backbreaking work. There's a little bit of digging involved, but in general, you're just kind of smothering what's there and then building a really fresh soil base on top of that, instead of having to actually dig up and like till the garden space.
So if I put a big barrier of mulch between my garden and hers, it would stop that invasion.
It should. It really depends. Like creeping Charlie, it spreads through like rhizomes that go underground a bit. So you may have to actually dig a trench and put some kind of barrier in there. Otherwise, it's just going to keep spreading.
Like
There's
weed
other
barrier.
things that it wouldn't be that bad, but I think creeping Charlie, you would have to maybe put some kind of barrier in there to stop it.
So that would be the fabric weed barrier?
Yeah, or some kind of edging, like they make like a steel edging or some kind of edging that you would put on the edge of a garden bed, or brick, even something like a divider of some kind to just stop it, get it a couple inches under the ground so that it doesn't go under. But it's not terrible to control, but you would need to control it if you want to keep it out of your yard. Otherwise, you have to use all kinds of chemicals on your grass to get it out. Creeping Charlie's in the mint family, so mints are tend to spread quite a bit. Smells wonderful.
Yes,
but
it does.
Yeah, I deal with it too, so I know the pains of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love mint. I have different kinds of it throughout my space, but like you said, if you don't keep on top of it, it's all over the place. So in closing, then let's give some tips for trimming for somebody who doesn't know what they're really doing starting out.
Okay.
So from that perspective, and then we're headed into fall. So how can we sort of create some curb appeal during the fall when the plants are either dying or they've disappeared into the winter, right? Because we get a lot of snow, as you do.
Sure. Yeah, so pruning, it can vary depending on what you're pruning. If you're just pruning shrubs and things like that, the biggest thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you're not pruning when the shrub is actively blooming or growing in any way. So you want to wait for the dormancy of that shrub. So it'll either be in like a very early spring or later in the fall. I usually just say like after the plant blooms, it's usually okay at that point once it's done with its blooming, because otherwise you're gonna stress it out and you could introduce some disease and things like that. But I would say less is more. Start really small, prune anything that's broken or dead or just looking gangly and yucky. You can prune those at any time of year, really, but take your time with pruning and just do a little bit of at a time, and then take a few steps back. Maybe stand on the sidewalk and just make sure that you're shaping it the way that you want to. And the biggest thing is just like not letting the plants get in the way of like sidewalks, or keeping the walkways open so that people can like approach the house, not blocking light from windows. So that's really when you would want to prune. I really try to just plant something that will grow and fit the space, so I don't have to do excessive pruning on anything, because I
Right.
just would prefer not to have the maintenance. But if you do have to like clean up a property, just get the shrub out of the way of the windows and out of the walkways is big.
Excellent.
So
And then prep for the winter, fall type thing. Is it
yeah,
just
for fall, I
the
mean,
magic of mulch?
the magic of mulch makes everything look new and fresh, so that's definitely a great option. I'd say even just some decor on the front door, like accentuating the front door is always is my go-to for fall. A wreath or something on the front door, containers filled with, there's lots of fall plants that they come out in the nursery. They're not out quite yet. I was just at our local nursery this weekend, and they're still kind of selling off the summer stuff here. But in a few weeks, you'll see like mums and all different beautiful plants that you could use for this time of year that are either blooming or have really nice foliage that would keep things going for quite a long time. And just choosing like a really beautiful container. Even I've seen at some public gardens, botanical gardens I've gone to, where they actually are just using containers and not even planting in the containers, but using the container as the focal point, and bringing color into the landscape. And that repetition of color can bring somebody down a path if they have the same color wreath or the front door color, plus the containers, plus maybe some plants in that same color, and just that repetition of the color, choosing one color and just kind of going with that and popping it into different places in your landscape is really useful in the fall, especially when things aren't blooming to their extremes anymore.
So would you work on the triangular placement like we do with design
Yeah,
within the garden as well?
similar, but it's more about like drawing people down a pathway, getting them to where you want to go, so guiding them. I know like inside you would design, and guiding the eye is a little bit different outside, because you need them to actually like move forward and walk. So that's why I always say accentuating the front door and making it very obvious that this is like where I'm heading to, and then giving them cues along the way, placing like little focal points along the way to get them to travel where you want to look where you want them to look, and then maybe not look at the things you might not want them to look at that aren't like the prettiest in the landscape. So yeah, you can use those the triangular views and bring people in with the repetition of color to also like draw their eye away from things too.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, I
Yeah.
could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, me too.
So
I
something
love
like that.
this.
So I wanted to thank you for your time, because I know you're extremely busy, and I really
Sure.
appreciate you taking some time out to chat with us today. And what
Anytime.
we want to encourage our listeners to is to review the landing page. We have special pricing
Mhm.
for you as a listener and a petitioner, part of being CSP International, and then really explore the opportunity that you have with Amy, and the website and the podcast, and her blogs are amazing, full of information.
Thank you.
And hopefully I gave her an idea that we maybe can, see coming down the line, something that will help our sellers come to fruition. So I look forward to hearing more about that. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll chat again in the spring.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward
It's
to
a
it.
pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.